In this video, I'm going to be talking about the difference between copying and flashing, copy and pasting and flashing. But before I do, I want to give credit to a place called the Nick Citadel on Discord, and I'll try to, yeah, invites are disabled, of course, yeah. The Nick Citadel, I'd post the invite, but they disabled it, and I want to give credit to somebody called Raid the Web. And yeah, so that's all their information right here, and they really helped me with this answer to help me understand it. So I said that I would give credit to them, and I am right now, so there you go. Anyway, so back to the thing. So what is the difference between copy and pasting versus flashing? Copy and pasting. When you copy and paste a file or folder to USB, you are just copy and pasting that information. The file transferred as a regular file, or the folder transferred as a regular folder. You are not copying the file system, the master boot record, or the file allocation table, or other information. When you copy and paste files from one drive to another, you're copying only the actual files and not the additional data of that the hard drive uses to locate and access those files. So what does this mean in contrast to flashing? When you flash information to a USB, you are performing a perfect bit-by-bit copy of all the contents of the ISO file onto the USB. And on top of that, you overwrite all the previous information that was on the USB, all of it. Okay, so you overwrite the file system of the USB with the file system of the ISO. You don't just copy all the normal files to the ISO. You copy the file system, the master boot record, the file allocation table, and the boot sectors, the partitions, whatever. When you flash an ISO that has an operating system on it, you are performing a special abnormal form of copying of the information on the ISO to the USB. And what that does is it doesn't turn the USB into a USB with a file on it. It turns the USB into a bootable drive that can be read by the boot BIOS and by your computer's boot BIOS and the motherboard. Flashing an ISO involves writing the contents of the ISO file to the USB in a specific way that makes it bootable. This process involves creating the boot sector on the USB drive and copying the necessary files from the ISO onto the USB drive. Flashing an ISO file to a USB drive creates a bootable USB that can be installed or run on an operating system. Copying and pasting an ISO file onto a USB drive simply transfers the file to the USB drive as a regular file, which cannot be used to boot an operating system. So I want to stress this. I want to illustrate this. When you flash an ISO file to a USB drive, what you're doing, you're not creating a USB drive with a file on it. You are creating a raw physical. You're creating raw data on a physical drive, a thumb drive, an external drive, whatever. You're creating a raw bit by bit 0 and 1 data that the motherboard of your computer can understand. That's what you're doing. That is what you're doing. You are creating raw data, right? You're not creating a storage device in the traditional sense. You're creating a bootable drive. You're creating raw data, right? You're transforming the ISO file into so the boot BIOS, the computer doesn't boot the ISO file. It boots the physical media, right? It boots the physical media because all the boot BIOS sees is the physical drive and all the zeros and ones on the drive, right? And it can either boot it or it can't. It doesn't see the file. It doesn't recognize the file. It doesn't recognize the file system. It doesn't recognize folders. All it recognizes is the physical USB. It sees that, and it sees the raw data. So when you flash an ISO file, what's actually happening is you're not putting that ISO file onto a USB. You're transforming that. You're using the ISO file as a vehicle to create a bootable physical thumb drive. That's what you're doing. And that's why this concept is so weird. And I'll explain it again in the next couple videos, but this is a really weird, really difficult to understand concept, is that the computer doesn't boot the ISO file, it just boots the physical media. You're using the ISO file as a means of, you're using the ISO file as a means, as a vehicle to creating bootable physical media. So that's what it means.